Hello, this is David. Welcome to Part 2, Topic 6, Gregory's Chapter 4, which is called Quantifying Counterparty Credit Exposure, Part 1. So this chapter is really, in Gregory, the introduction to specifically the concept of credit exposure, and the associated learning workbook is T6.Gregory.4 exposure. Gregory, the author, the .4, because it's chapter 4, at least in this, the first edition. That'll be updated when we get to the second edition in 2014. And its relevance, roughly, although difficult to predict, I would say is medium in terms of the exam. And so we start with the learning outcome. Explain the following techniques you use to quantify credit exposure. And there is a sequence or hierarchy here where Gregory illustrates or explains the mark-to-market plus add-ons. So we could call this the add-on approach. You can see that in the aim. And then there's the semi-analytical, and finally the most sophisticated being the Monte Carlo simulation. So you can think of these as in a progression where the add-on is simplistic and the Monte Carlo simulation is sophisticated. So in the add-ons or mark-to-market plus add-ons approach, we simply take the current exposure, and just to remind, current exposure is going to be a positive mark-to-market. The mark-to-market value itself can be negative or positive, and that's one of the features of the bilateral derivatives contract. But the exposure is only going to be positive. The current exposure is only going to be the value for a positive mark-to-market. If the mark-to-market is negative, then the current exposure is zero. That's because we're exposed to counterparty risk when our position is in a gain or when we're in the money. So we take the current exposure and add a component that represents the uncertainty of the potential future exposure. So recall, that's really the difficult part of the measurement. It's not so much the current exposure, but the fact that, especially on these long-term contracts, we're really trying to anticipate or derive a metric based on an uncertain future. So this is highly simplistic and was the basis of the Basel I. The add-on component should account for the time horizon in question, the volatility of the underlying asset class, and the nature of the underlying transaction.